The NHL released its 2025-2026 season schedule yesterday, and on today's edition of Locked On NHL, Hunter Hodies and I are going to break down how the NHL could make their schedule and their postseason a little bit better for us, the viewer. Coming up next.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That is my good friend and one of the co-hosts of Locked On Penguins, Hunter Hodies. We want to thank everyone that is making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team's every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, on today's edition of Locked On NHL, we are going to break down the schedule from a few different perspectives. We're going to start out talking about with what we presently have, why it's set up the way it is, why the NHL cares so much about trying to make attractions of certain teams. In our second segment, we'll pivot to ideas for spicing up or improving the regular season schedule. And then in our final segment, we will talk about means of making the playoff format that we presently have a little bit better. So, Hunter, my friend, we exist in a world right now where we play 82 regular season games, though 2 years from now that's going to change. We're going up to 84 for 26-27 as part of the newest round of the CBA. Making up the present 82 games, and this is what the Matrix was after they added the Kraken a couple years ago. You play the 7 other teams in your division 3 or 4 times, depending on the year, depending on the team. They try and rotate that year over year, so you end up playing everybody relatively evenly. You play the other teams in the opposite division of your conference 3 times a piece. It alternates who has 2 home games and 2 road games year after year. So that evens out. And then the last component we have, you play every team in the other conference twice. You get a home and home, 1 road game, 1 home game. And the reason for that last part in particular, and something I don't necessarily care particularly much about me, myself, but I get why the NHL does, they want everybody to see everybody. You know, if you're in Seattle, you get Sidney Crosby coming once a year. You get Connor McDavid or Ovi once a year. That's why that's a thing. But I am very much open to playing around with ideas. But this is what we have right now, and it's largely because the NHL cares so much about that gate revenue.
Oh, 100%. Like, I really don't mind playing Western Conference teams. You know, obviously I cover a team in the Eastern Conference. I don't mind playing a team in the West twice a year. I think that's totally valid to me. I think that's actually one of the favorite parts of the schedule is that you can get some of those top players in the Western Conference to come to your barn once a year, and then obviously you go to the other place once. For example, you know, it's always fun when Connor McDavid goes up against Sidney Crosby once or twice a year, depending if anyone is hurt, but hopefully we get twice a year for each time. It's always fun, especially here in Pittsburgh. You get to see Connor McDavid go up against Sid. In Edmonton, Penguins fans out there, if they want to, they can go see Sidney Crosby go up against McDavid. It's the same thing for, again, I'll use an example for even the Penguins playing the Canadians. The Canadian crowd, they love when Sidney Crosby goes to the Bell Center. They give him a standing ovation. It feels like every time he's there. So that part of the schedule is also really good for me as well. I understand why the NHL is doing what they're doing, going from 82 to 84, Nick, because they want you to play all your divisional teams 4 times. Me personally, I don't give much of a crap about it. Like, there's some teams in my division that I don't want to play 4 times because I don't like the way they play. So I think I'm good with some of the times you play them 3 times. Now, it does sacrifice a little bit depending on the year. For example, this year, Nick, the Penguins only played the Capitals 3 times, only 1 time in Washington, D.C. I think maybe there could be a situation where some of the other teams, depending on the year, could get rotated, but not a team like the Capitals, which has been a bitter rival of the Penguins for quite a while now, especially during this Ovechkin-Crosby era of NHL hockey. I think that should be a situation where you always do 2 times in D.C., 2 times in Pittsburgh. It should never be on an odd number or anything like that. I think for maybe some of the other rival teams in the Metro, especially from a Penguins perspective, you know, for the teams that are not as big rivals, it could be 3 times. But for like the big rivals, like I'm talking Washington, I'm talking New York, the Rangers, that is, I'm talking Philadelphia, those should stay at 4 games. And then for teams maybe like the Hurricanes, for example, even to a lesser extent right now, the Devils, maybe even the Islanders, that could be maybe 3 games. And you could do that for any division. I know I'm talking a lot about the Penguins right now, but you could do that for any of these teams that have big rivals in their own division versus teams in their division that aren't as big rivals. So I think that's maybe something to consider going forward too.
That's definitely something we'll hit on in our next segment, because I do think there's a better way of emphasizing what the NHL wants while also trying to make the schedule just a little more efficient and maybe a little more even. The other part of this, and the real big part for me, I think we don't understand the scale in which the NHL is dependent on ticket sales for its revenue. 44% of NHL revenues are from ticket sales. Almost half of the league's revenues, which is everything when it gets put into one big pot. Almost half comes from people physically buying tickets and going to games. That is drastically different. That's 13% larger than the next closest league, which is Major League Baseball. And you have to think, MLB stadiums are twice as big as NHL stadiums, and they are not drawing revenue-wise to the degree what the NHL is, because, and this is obvious, and we've talked about this quite a bit over the year and a half, 2 years we've been doing this show, it's because the TV deal isn't as much. That's why the NHL is so dependent on ticket sales being a driving force for revenues, because you compare it to, say, the NBA or the NFL, who are getting billions of dollars over shorter periods of time than what the NHL is, and they aren't as dependent as on ticket sales. And look, I'm not saying there would be a recourse where if the NHL got more money from TV deals, they would lower ticket prices as a means of like making it easier for everybody, more accessible for everybody. Because we know that's not how it works. NFL tickets are the most expensive of the 4 major sports to get on a consistent basis. And sure, some of that's only is because they have 9 or 8 home games depending on the year, and that rotates. But by and large, until the NHL can make up that deficit, we're going to see the NHL, I don't want to say breaking out like tricks and like hokey things, but like, yeah, they're going to keep doing some of these things where everybody plays everybody once. They're never getting rid of the Stadium Series. They're never getting rid of the Winter Classic, because that's a guaranteed $1 million for just the ticket sales, not including the specialty stuff and the stuff leading up to that. That's $1 million. And like you and I have talked about this a lot. I think there's an argument we already have too many teams, let alone expanding our league. I think the season's too long. I think 82 games is too many, frankly. We're playing from the first week of October through the second to last week of June. We're playing over the course of 8.5, 9 months, not including
Let's start
preseason.
The season at the end of September at this rate, or maybe even mid-September. I know some people will be like, well, that's when the NFL starts. Well, you still end the season in what, Nick? Early June, late May, Memorial Day weekend, something like that. I think with where the season is right now, like the Stanley Cup final is ending in basically late June. It feels like once we keep expanding games, Nick, we're going to have the Stanley Cup final by the 4th of July at this rate. That's too late for me. Like, I don't think we need hockey going that deep into the summer.
No, and look, we'll get more to this in our next segment where we'll talk about things we would like to see as far as improvements, means of making the schedule more compelling. But the last point I wanted to get in, it's okay that they want to scale back on preseason games. Yes. By and large, nobody particularly cares. Most teams don't play their guys, and if they do, they're only playing 3 or 4 of the 8 to 10 preseason games most of these teams are playing. The only real knock against the scaling back of the preseason is you lose some of the novelties. Some teams will play a game or two in a smaller market adjacent to their city. Like you'll have the novelty game, you'll have that Kraft Hockeyville game that's played somewhere in like Nova Scotia where there's not an NHL footprint. The Rangers and Islanders always play a game in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I assume that'll go away over time as well. Those are good for smaller footprints to like do a solid for the footprint of your market. But by and large, the preseason games don't matter. So if you want to scale it back from 8 to 4 and add 2 regular season games at the front end of the schedule, that's fine with me. I just don't think we need to play 84 regular season games. I think you're devaluing the regular season when you have to play that many games.
I agree with you. It's like I said, and we're going to probably talk about it a bit more coming up here in the second segment, Nick. They're only doing it so that every team in each division plays their divisional teams 4 times. And I just don't think that's good enough of a reason. So I'll kind of leave it at that. If we want to expand about that in the second segment, we can. But that's really the only reason why they're doing it, at least in my opinion.
We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, Hunter and I are going to break down some of the things we would like to see to make the NHL schedule a little bit more compelling and, frankly, a little bit better. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On NHL. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning for a big purchase, Monarch helps put you in the driver's seat. It's like having a personal CFO to give you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is so much more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you're not just managing money, you are building wealth. Like most people in their 20s, I'm not the best at planning long-term saving, but with the help of Monarch Money, I was able to put some money aside, pay off my vacation, get a new pair of noise-canceling headphones, which I'm very happy about. If you are ready to take control of your finances, you need to visit monarchmoney.com today. And if you use code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout, you will get 50% off your first year subscription. One more time, that's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year subscription. Hello, everyone, and thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL with Hunter Hodies and I as we talk about the NHL schedule. It came out yesterday, and look, real quick before we talk about our improvements. Yes, you can make some snapshot conclusions. Oh, this is a long road trip. Oh, I'm going to have to worry about this. Oh, the last 5 to 10 games of the regular season are really tough. You know, if you're a bubble team, can you get an easier path? And we are so far away from hockey, guys. Like, as much as I want to panic about the Rangers having to play the Panthers, Lightning, Panthers, and Stars in their final 5 regular season games, that's like a 10 months from now problem. We got to get there before I can really worry about it. We have no idea what state these teams are going to be in 10 months from now. You think about right now, like, you're thinking about the schedule, and you think about what the Stars were doing at the end of the regular season last year, where they went, 1-8 down the backstretch. You have no idea what shape anyone's going to be in. Yeah, you look for certain rivalries. You look for when a certain team is coming if you want to see a certain player. You know, if you're playing in one of the marquee games, you know, if you're in a stadium series or win a classic, you care about that. But by and large, we are so far away from hockey. Take a deep breath, and it's going to be okay.
Hey, it was still fun, at least writing a column today for the Hockey News, just like detailing stuff that stood out about the schedule, even though I agree with your overall point that it is still several months away. Well, I shouldn't say several. It's a few months away from starting, but several months away in terms of, you know, March or April. It's funny, March is the busiest month coming up for the Penguins for the 25-26 season. I did write about that a little bit. 17 games in a 31-day span, Nick. Pretty tough there for a team, the Penguins that is, that's probably going to be out of it by that rate, and it's probably going to look a lot different considering that I think they're going to be big sellers at the deadline, considering that they are probably the only pure seller right now in the league. Something at the end of the season that stood out to me also was, you know, 2 of their final 3 games are against the Capitals, and if this is truly it for Ovechkin and Malkin, we could see a pretty cool standoff there. So, hey, Nick, the schedule makers might have cooked with that aspect, but we still have to decide, or not have to decide, we still have to see what Ovi and Malkin want to do because they haven't made a decision about that. So, hey, they might have cooked with that if Malkin and Ovi decide that this is truly it. But, hey, March and April, still several months away at this rate.
You're not wrong there. One thing that stuck out to me about the Oilers schedule real quick, they have one really rough stretch of games in mid-November where it's a 7-game road trip that starts in Columbus and culminates in Florida. That's the longest road trip of the season. It builds up to a game on Hockey Night in Canada on a Saturday night against the defending 2-time Stanley Cup champion Panthers, who, of course, have beaten the Oilers in 2 straight Stanley Cup finals. So that's a really rough go of it. But other than that, your normal pockets. The one thing I don't like, and I want to start here as far as talking about the games themselves. Number one, I don't like when division opponents are done early in the season or they don't play each other until too late in the season. You know, the Flames play the Oilers 3 times this upcoming season. The last time they play them is in February. The Flames not playing the Oilers in March or April kind of seems bad. Like, you would want to lean into those rivalries during the hottest part of your season. You know, the Rangers and the Devils play each other 3 times by February, and that's it. They're done for the year. they need to space these division games out a little bit more. And this is something baseball does a great job of, where in September, you're mostly playing divisional opponents to, I don't want to say grease the skids, but that's effectively what you're doing. You're trying to incentivize teams that are hanging around, even if they're not that good, to play spoiler against direct divisional opponents. And those games, they have, they're effectively 2-point swings. In the NHL, it's a 4-point swing when you're playing a divisional opponent late in the year.
And even not even with that for baseball, Nick, but even say a division is really tight, those divisional games can decide between two teams that are jockeying for that division crown who wins, like especially for a 3 to even 4 game series. So I really like how the MLB does that. And Nick, they also now, kind of like the NHL, they have every team play each other. That started a couple of years
at least once, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm totally good with that too. But getting back to your original point, I remember this was during the 21-22 season. The Penguins and the Rangers didn't play each other until the second half of the season.
And then they played 4 times in a month.
Yeah, and then of course they had the playoff series where they played 7 games. It's just like you shouldn't be waiting that long to play one of your division rivals. Also, even on the Penguins schedule this year, they play the Capitals one time in the first half. Nick, they don't play them again until 2 of their final 3 games of the regular season. Why? Like, that's one of your biggest rivals. You're playing them once in the first half, and then you're not seeing them again until basically almost when the season is over. And then also, I'll make another comparison for the Penguins, because I guess we're just going to keep doing that for the teams that we cover. The Penguins play the New York Rangers 2 of their first 3 games of the season. After that, there's a pretty big break. But it's like, do we really need that to start the season? Like, I'm good with a game at the start, but I don't think we need 2 of your first 3 games to be against divisional teams. And then after that, you don't really have too many games against that same team to look forward to. So I agree. I think the NHL just needs to do a better job of balancing these divisional games. Like, sometimes you start playing these teams too late. Sometimes even at the first 3 games of the season, 2 of your first 3 games are against the same team in your own division. I also think that's a little bit of overkill too. So it's just about finding that right balance, and the NHL just hasn't been able to do it.
So continuing off with that, something I think that would help, and we'll talk about this more in terms of the playoffs as well in our next segment, but I think there's a world where if we make teams that are in the same division play each other more, we get the more desired outcome that the NHL says it's looking for in the postseason. The NHL says, well, we want to foster rivalries. We want the same teams to play each other over and over again in the playoffs, and that's an easier way to do it. I disagree. I think the better way to do this, and we'll talk about it more in our next segment, but so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, I think you want to incentivize divisional and conference opponents a little bit more. You want to center the schedule around that. I mean, we don't necessarily need to do what Major League Baseball used to do, where the Yankees and Red Sox would play each other 19 times in a regular season. But I do think there's a world where if you scaled back everybody playing everybody from a home and home to doing what baseball does now, where it's you either play there or here the following year, and you create a little bit more of an allure of, well, I can't see him if if I don't go this time around for 2 years. I think there's a world where you sneak an extra division or conference opponent game in there, and that matters a hell of a lot more. You think about last year, the Eastern Conference coming down to Columbus, the Rangers, Detroit, Montreal, Ottawa. All of those teams desperately needed points, and when you play those non-division, non-conference opponents, those games, they just don't have as much material value. And look, I'm not saying there's a perfect answer to this. There isn't. The NHL is going to keep trial and erroring this until they find something they like. We'll see what expansion does to this. Yeah. If we go up to the purported 34 teams with Houston and Atlanta, what that does for the scheduling matrix, how much everybody's going to play each other. And we'll talk about how much it'll impact when it goes up to an 84 game. Like you said, we're assuming that 84, those extra 2 games are so you play everyone in your division 4 times for sure.
Right. So I think your idea, Nick, would be to kind of play one Western Conference team each year, either at your place or at their barn, and then it kind of alternates. So I do think that would make some sense. So then you add maybe an extra game to the teams, for example, in the Metro to the Atlantic, or saying for the Central to the Pacific, where you have 4 games each, 2 at your place, 2 at the other team's place. You play everyone in your conference 4 times, and then you play everyone in the West 1 time. I think that would probably work. I just don't know if the NHL is ever going to go down that road, because, as we said, Nick, you need to sell tickets. You have other really good players in the other conference, you have the opportunity to come to your barn. I think at the end of the day, that's going to prove to be, I think, like the big thing when it comes to just schedules. I don't think they're ever going to take that away.
You're probably right in that respect, because it does make an attraction of certain players where you get your one opportunity to see the marquee guys in a given year. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On NHL. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how some of these impacts would change the playoffs and make the playoff format better, because Lord knows I'm tired of this format. Be right back. We have all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot or not get tickets at all. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping, and that's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting tickets faster and easier than ever. Did you know prices actually drop the closer it gets to showtime? So you can save up to 60% off with Game Time's killer last-minute deals. If you're tired of endless scrolling to find your best deal, Game Time's own deals pick the seat in your section for you. And my personal favorite part of the Game Time ticket experience, the panoramic seat view, so there are no surprises of what you're walking into the night of the show. And if you're worried about what happens if plans change, the Game Time guarantee has your back with cancellation protection and so much more. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL with Hunter Hodies and I. And look, if you're familiar with Hunter and I and our takes on this show, you know we hate the divisional playoff format. This stinks. This does not reward this penalizes teams in the
Nick,
regular
you're telling
season.
me you don't want to see the Kings versus the Oilers round 5,000 coming up again in 25-26? I have seen so many of the same matchups in this format year after year, and I'm over it. I just want to see new playoff matchups. I know what the NHL is going for. Well, this builds new rivalries and all that stuff. Sure, it does. You know what it also does? It annoys the crap out of a lot of fans. You can put a poll, and I remember this. Josh Yohe of The Athletic, a really good Penguins writer, put out a poll. Which format do you prefer, this one or the old 1 versus 8? Over 90% of people voted for 1 versus 8. And there's other formats you can come up with as well. There's a couple of good ones. For example, one of them, maybe the top seeds get to pick their playoff opponents for some full chaos type of stuff with that. Maybe just see them 1 versus 16, but that would be probably a little too hard just because of travel and all that. That's probably the least likely one to occur. But I just don't need to keep seeing the same matchups. Like Dallas, Colorado this year was so good, but that's not a first round series. Come on. Like that should be a second round Western Conference final type series. You're not rewarding the best teams after their regular season success. And it just leads to really good teams being bounced early. And I hate this format. I think it's trash.
So the big thing for me, you already play too many regular season games. The season is already too long. We are de-incentivizing regular season performance with a season that's this long. We are de-incentivizing good teams from trying their best down the backstretch of the regular season. And look, I'm not saying teams are throwing games, but they're holding guys out of lineups for injury reasons down the backstretch because they know, okay, we're locked into this spot because we can't fall down to the wild card because the way the divisions are set up. You know, there are years where you're going to have a division where the third seed, you know, is 94, 95 points. And there are going to be wild card teams who have more points than that. But because of the way this is set up, those teams, even if they had the better regular season, don't get rewarded for it. And that's flat out unfair. We're saying that all of these games matter and that we want them to count down to the last one, to game 82. Then why are we penalizing teams, or why are we rewarding teams that aren't performing? There should never be a time where a wild card seed has a better record in this format and isn't one of the better playoff spots. And look, this isn't quite like the NFL. I know that was a rules proposition, but based on the Vikings a couple of years ago, where they had the great record and had to go on the road for the wild card game this past year. But we're talking about a situation where teams that in the old format would have been seeded as the 7 or 8 seed having to go against the 1 or the 2, getting to duck that to some degree and getting a more favorable matchup. And look, we know the 1 through 8 works. I think the NHL has, and the big thing for me, and this isn't great because we don't have a huge sample to draw upon, we have yet to have a team seeded as a wild card win the Stanley Cup. We've had a few teams that were wild cards make the final. Florida a couple years ago made it to the final. We've had it happen a handful of times. The last team in a 7 or 8 seed in the old format to win the whole thing was the Kings, and that was 2012. We are effectively, especially that 1-8. And look, the 1-8 is always going to be lopsided. That's kind of part of the nature of it, regardless. We've seen it the last 2 years really kind of be a laugher in some regards. But there is a better way of doing this, that we can get more variety in our playoff matchups. We can incentivize regular season performance more. We can penalize lower quality teams for their regular season performance more. And most importantly, we can make the playoffs more competitive and more rewarding for the teams that are supposed to be there. To your point, Colorado and Dallas should not be playing each other in the first rounds. Those were probably the 3rd or 2nd best teams, or at worst, the 3rd and 4th best teams in the conference last year. And they had to play each other in the first round. And I have no reservation in saying that if Colorado went through, I could have seen them going through to the conference final or winning the whole thing. I think Colorado was perfectly capable of that. And look, there will be people on the other side of this argument who say, well, Colorado should have just won. If they won their series, they wouldn't have had to deal with it. But at the same time, in the other format, they would have gotten a better matchup. In the other format, they probably would have played the Oilers or the Kings in the first round, and that would have been an easier matchup. And that's what we're trying to reward here. The better your regular season, the easier your first round opponent should be.
Sometimes there is some overlap. Like when you compare this current format to 1 versus 8, you sometimes get the same matchups, but in a lot of other times you don't get the same matchups, and it feels like more competitive matchups where you're not boning some of these top teams in the league year after year. Like, heck, Nick, if you want to have the top 2 seeds in a 1 versus 8 be the division winners in each division in the conference, that's fine with me. And then you can just seed 3 through 8, boom. Like the number 1 seed, most points in one division. Number 2 seed, the most points in the other division. And then 3 through 8, boom, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, whoever else is in those divisions that makes the playoffs. That to me, I still think is more competitive. If you don't want to do it that way, you just want to do by points, doesn't matter if those 2 teams win the divisions, okay, whatever. I still think it's probably more fair if you just do the top 2 seeds as the division winners, just because that's something to play for as the top seed in the conference, so you deserve to have that. But that's also just my opinion. I just think that's more competitive than what we have right now when we're just getting the same matchups. Like I remember back in 2017, the Penguins played the Blue Jackets in the first round. Those were 2 of the 6 to 7 best teams in the entire league that season, and they were paired up in the first round. Those Penguins Capitals series in 2016 to 18 were some of the best playoff series, I watched growing up. They were fantastic. But a lot of those series probably should have been a conference final based on the records that those 2 teams had year after year after year. Again, I think it devalues some of these teams, the regular seasons that they have, and it forces them to play, similar team that's right with them in the standings. Like, do we get good series out of these? Sure. I'm not going to deny that. But I just don't think it's the most fair format. I think 1 versus 8 is better. But again, the NHL, it seems like, has no appetite to go back to that, even though I would say 85 to 90% of fans prefer that format.
So the last thing I have, and this was brought back into my memory the other day because I was talking with my friends about the Yankees and Red Sox in like 2004, 2005. I think there's an argument, if you want to reward the team that has home ice advantage, that we should be doing game 1 and 2 at one venue, 3, 4, 5 at the team with the lower seed, and then 6 and 7
2,
with the
3,
team
2.
with the higher seed. Yeah, 2, 3, 2 to reward the team with the better home ice reward the better team with home ice, because right now that 5, 6, 7 back and forth, it can be really tedious. We saw that in the Stanley Cup final each of the last 2 years, the longest flight you could do being from the northernmost team to the southernmost team. I do think there's an argument that if you really want to incentivize home ice, that's a means of doing it. And we know that over the last 10 to 15 years, the value of home ice has dissipated over time, that the road team has closed the gap on the impact of home ice.
It's an interesting idea, and say, for example, the team with home ice, you win the first 2 games. Even if you, say, lose the next 3, you go down 3-2, you still have that home ice to able to stave off elimination. And if you win that, you still have game 7 in your barn as well. So I do think that's also an interesting thought. I'm just, again, not sure the NHL is just going to go down that road, because they really have shown no incentive to doing it. Again, there's been a lot of outcry when it comes to the playoff format ever since they implemented it a little over a decade ago, but I don't think Bettman and Daly care about that in this way. Though I would be curious to see how a 2-3-2 format would go. Just don't think we're going to get it for a while.
It's just another idea, because right now it feels like home ice doesn't matter that much to certain teams. I mean, the Oilers, they had a chance to play for home ice over their final 5 regular season games, and then they didn't dress anyone for those final 5 games because they didn't care, because they said, we're playing the Kings. We think we can beat them on the road at least once, and that'll be enough. Ultimately, they did. But I do think there is an argument for that as far as trying to spice the playoffs up, make them a little more rewarding for the better regular season team. Because if we're going to play a regular season for 5 months, we should make it worth something, shouldn't we?
That's how the top teams pick their playoff opponents if you want to go full chaos. And then if that team that you pick beats that top seed, the takes will be melting steel beams for a while, because that's also another way you build a rivalry, by the way. Say the top seed picks a lower seed, that lower seed wins. Although those fans are going to be going at that top seed for quite a while. Again, total chaos stuff. Don't think the NHL would do it, but man, it would be fun.
That'll do it for this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. Thank you to everyone that made Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your teams covered every day. Hunter and I will talk to you guys next Thursday. See everyone real soon.